to Shelf Help, a channel dedicated to talking into the void about whatever book I happen to be reading. I am your host, the reader. The following review will contain spoilers. First and foremost, putting the last chapter of this book with the answer to the mystery online so it has to be downloaded, dick move. The website will not always be there, but copies of this book will circulate long after it's gone. I understand it's promotional for the movie, but still, not cool. Speaking of the movie, this book started as a screenplay and was adapted into a book to run parallel to the movie. I never saw the movie. I don't actually remember it coming out, so I looked it up. The critic score on Rotten Tomatoes was a spectacular 10%, while the audience score was a resounding 36%. Was the book better? That sounds like a question for Crimson Rogue. This book promises a gritty reboot of the classic tale of Little Red Riding Hood. I hate that phrase, by the way. It's a dead giveaway that someone has never read the original. The first known written version of Little Red Riding Hood was by Charles Perrault, 17th century France. In it, the wolf enters Grandma's house, murders and butchers the old woman, pours her blood into a bottle, and sets her flesh on a platter. This he feeds to Little Red after she gives over her basket of goodies. Then the wolf tells Red to strip off her clothes, burn them in the fire, and climb into bed with him. It isn't until the Grimm's brothers get their hands on the tale that Red and Grandma live, thanks to a helpful woodsman. If you're going to call something a gritty reboot, you better be sure the original doesn't have pedophilia, bestiality, and cannibalism in it. Ahem. As I was saying, this book and movie came out in 2011 and is a blatant appeal to the Twilight crowd. It's not that big of a book, about 350 pages, but a large chunk of it is dedicated to the love triangle. Our main character is Valerie. Her father's a drunk, her mother is a daydreamer, and her sister is beautiful, and she's kind of a tomboy. Really, there's not much to say about her. She's there to be the audience stand-in. But nonetheless, she is the object of affection of two beautiful men. First, we have Peter, a woodcutter. He is a childhood friend who had to leave the village abruptly for reasons that are not entirely clear, but has come back from a neighboring village to help with the wheat harvest. He wears black and is sexy and is constantly drawing her in only to push her away because he's not good for her. Everyone in town disapproves of him, but lets him help anyway because reasons. And on the other hand, we have Henry, the blacksmith's son and richest boy in town. He's in love with Valerie because she's pretty, though of course she insists her sister is the pretty one. Henry is very kind and handsome and wants to give Valerie the best life. So, knowing that, we can all agree Peter is the obvious choice. Like I said, it's trying to ride Twilight's coattails, so of course she goes with the hot, dark, mysterious one. The unnamed village has lived with the big bad wolf for generations, offering it livestock in exchange for peace. And then the wolf kills Lucy, Valerie's younger sister, leaving her mutilated body in the wheat field. The villagers decide this is a bridge too far and go wolf hunting. Several are killed in the attempt, including Henry's father. But they do get a wolf, specifically the villager known as the Reeves. He's not given any other name, just the Reeves, another title for a magistrate. But it's odd that there's no name attached to it. I'll get back to that. It is at this point that the professional werewolf hunter, Father Solomon, contacted by the local priest, arrives to tell them that the wolf they killed is not the wolf. The Reeves objects, and the celebration follows. It takes up more time in the book than it really should, and reminded again that this was originally a movie screenplay. Of course, the wolf attacks, and many villagers are slaughtered. Father Solomon declares that the wolf can only be someone from the village, kicking off a downward spiral of mistrust and paranoia that causes the villagers to surrender their privacy to Solomon's authority while treating their neighbors and even family with suspicion and fear. And everything comes to a head when Valerie is accused of witchcraft and being in league with the wolf. Henry and Peter are forced into an uneasy alliance to save the woman they love. But who is the wolf? Well, to learn that, you need to download the final chapter. Again, dick move. So how does this book stack up? As I said, this book was developed from a screenplay, and it shows. Scenes are abrupt and don't lead into each other. An early example is when Valerie tries to run away with Peter, only to have the bell toll announcing the attack that killed her sister. The scene cuts, and the next we see is her joining the villagers around her sister's body. One scene just stops, and the next just starts. Books and movies are obviously different media. Neither is inherently worse than the other, just different. The biggest difference is time. Most movies, unless you're doing something big like Lord of the Rings, aren't going to be much more than 2 hours, because most people watch movies in one sitting. Books, on the other hand, are read in quiet moments over several days. Most people just don't have the time to read a book in one straight shot, so movies tend to cut the fluff. They let us assume things happen so they can get to the important parts. For books, these details are important. They build tension and character. In this case, it would have been good to see Valerie's moment of indecision, then running back to the village to search for those she loved, being swept up in the general panic, and then finding her sister. It is the payoff for the emotional investment. Instead, we go from the bell tolling to Valerie joining the villagers around the body. In the movie, this is good framing. In the book, it just rings kind of hollow. There are also issues with the setting that I am pretty sure evolved from starting as a screenplay. It is written like a poor pan-European village, but their blacksmith works with gold, their cottages are on stilts, and the village has a dye maker with silos of flowers for making blue dye, something that would be extremely rare and expensive. And there appears to be no nobility structure beyond the Reeves, just a village out in the middle of nowhere. And most of the villagers don't even have names. If they're not an important character, we're not introduced to them. Movies can get away with a lot of hand-waving because they have to move the story along. Books need world building. And so much time was dedicated to the who will she pick subplot that the world building got left in the dirt. Things just happen because that's how the story goes. Her grandmother lives in the woods away from this village despite the evil wolf. Why? Because in the original, Red Riding Hood had to go through the woods to visit her grandmother. Her grandmother gives her a red cloak. Why? Because Red Riding Hood has a red cloak. Why are these people even in this place? We see people can leave the village. Why stay? Because they need a village. And so on. Things happen because the plot says so, with no thought as to how or why they should. Finally, scenes feel oddly blocked. A character moves to this place, takes this action, has this expression, and says this line. Very much like characters are being directed instead of people taking perfectly natural actions. Towards the end of the book, Valerie has a bad dream about her grandmother. So she throws on her red cloak and heads out alone into the woods, with the killer werewolf still on the loose. And no one really tries to stop her. She meets Peter, who has no reason to be wandering about either, and they have a moment. It's very cinematic. Woods covered in heavy, fresh white snow, Valerie in red, Peter in black. I'm sure it makes a beautiful scene. But more time is dedicated to setting up this shot in a rather contrived, roundabout sort of way than is given to what it means for Valerie and her choices. The fact she backtracks in the very next chapter doesn't help either. I'm going to put this one on my 4th shelf. It's not horrible, and it's leaps and bounds better than Twilight. There is a real mystery, and the answer isn't screaming off the page. But it's also not good. It promises a gritty reboot, but spends most of its time on a love triangle. It's clunky, scenes cut off and start abruptly, characters are moved around like dolls, and a lot of the scenes feel written for a visual appeal in a non-visual medium. Thank you for your time. I know everyone's mileage will vary, so feel free to leave your thoughts.